Okay, our next speaker is Simon Horman, and he's going to have some words of wisdom about deprecating code. So, Simon?
Hello. So this presentation is basically, I think a better title would be, it's about old things and what to do with them. So let's see how we go. Okay, so firstly, OVS is a quite mature project. I put some numbers up here. It's not about the numbers. This is just illustrating that it's been around for quite a long time. It's had a lot of contributors and a lot of contributions. Aaron is alphabetically the top of the list. So as projects get old, they accumulate craft, much like people's houses. And that is certainly the case here. So I just wanted to sort of touch on this topic and open a conversation about how we might improve the situation. Okay, so there'll be kind of two topics, main topics here. One is this distribution topic, and the other is how to get rid of old code. So the urgency of this has changed somewhat since I drafted these slides a few weeks ago, because our good friends over at Ubuntu extended the life cycle of Ubuntu 14 by a number of years. So it was quite a pressing topic. April 2026 is not very far away. It's now become less pressing, but it's still a topic. So Ilya recently fixed up OVS, so it works correctly on this distro. And the main two challenges are the bullet points there. We cannot support SSL in this distribution because OpenSSL is too old. We could, of course, add compiler, a custom OpenSSL, but that's not the case at this time. And Python is also too old, but downloading and installing a custom Python, the upstream Python is quite trivial. So this is the current solution. There's a GitHub action that is doing all these things now, and that's working pretty well. But eventually, we will get to 2029, and we will want to do something about this. So the logical thing is to just move forwards by one release. And what problems does this solve for us? Curiously, neither of the the issues I highlighted are actually resolved. However, it doesn't make things any worse. So this is kind of a logical way to go. We do get a bit newer GCC version, although still quite old, and likewise with the kernel. This is probably where we want to go. As a thought exercise, what if we went to something more modern? I use that more advisedly. It's obviously still reasonably old, to 2004. This is, as far as I could tell, the oldest Ubuntu distro where we do not have the OpenSSL or Python issue. We can just use the native ones. However, I believe that if we were to do this, we would actually be ahead of a good portion of our user base. For instance, I work at Red Hat, and RHEL 8, which is still used out in the wild, it has older things than this. So I can't advise that, but this is a thought exercise. This is kind of interesting. This, I guess we will get here sometime in the future, but in a way, we're kind of stuck with supporting old things because we want to support a very wide user base. Sorry, I went the wrong way. All right, so kind of related to this is minimum kernel version. So currently, we have no minimum kernel version. I'm sure in practice there is one out there, but none is advertised. And it works at least back to 4.1. And it probably, I think this should be 14, sorry. It implies it works actually all the way back to 3.13, which is quite an old kernel by now. So sort of as a side topic here is, back in the old days, a long time ago, the kernel module for OVS was part of the OVS tree, not part of the kernel tree. At some point, it was included in the kernel, and at some later, but still quite distant point in the past by now, it was removed from the OVS tree. However, OVS user space still supports using the old kernel module that was shipped as part of the OVS tree, which is no longer shipped again. So in theory, you could take today's user space and use it on many, many years ago's kernel version and kernel module, out of tree kernel module, and it works. But this is, I don't think this is really a thing that anyone would actually be doing. And if we were to remove this support, so basically to say you must use the upstream kernel version, we would simplify the code. We wouldn't have to have all this legacy stuff. We would definitely simplify the documentation, which I personally recently edited. It's very confusing because it tries to cover all these options, even though the only sensible option is to use the upstream kernel module. So I would recommend, based on some analysis, that 4.4 kernel, which is still quite old, is a good minimum. It, I believe, corresponds to this. But if we're not going to move forwards, I see I had to edit these slides. It does correspond to this, and it essentially is feature complete. Of course, new features have been added over time, but with when compared to the out-of-tree kernel module. Minimum GCC version, this is perhaps a less pressing issue. Okay, but if we move to new GCC version, then we can use new C standard. We can simplify the code perhaps a little bit, move forwards in time. However, and as a reference, the kernel, I spent a lot of time working on the kernel, recently moved to 8. GCC 8 is now the minimum requirement for modern kernel. This may be a lot easier once we've removed support for the out-of-tree kernel module, which is by definition quite old code by now. Okay, so this is, I only have a few minutes left, but this is the second half of the topic in one slide. We also have features in OVS which are not really used or not well supported. So other than the out-of-tree kernel module support, there's the Windows port, which is complex. It is difficult to maintain. Most, possibly all of the maintainers don't really have an environment to exercise this. And the user space, it probably exists, but it's very small. So it's hard to maintain something we can't easily maintain. So it would be nice to consider removing this. AVX 512 support. I saw some very good presentations on this at earlier editions of this conference. However, it's not actively maintained. It's not actively, it's not enabled, but in most configurations, there have been security risks. I'm not expert on this topic, but if you look at downfall, you could find that there are some quite concerning issues around AVX 512. It would be nice to remove this. So as I only have a, oops, I have time? Okay, so this is the meat. This is the last slide, but it's also the meat of the conversation. Is what do we want to do about this? Are we interested in establishing minimum versions for things? When I said we have a minimum distro version, this is sort of by default. It's the oldest thing that's known to work. Do we want to remove old code, or are we happy with it just sitting there? And if we want to remove things, what is our approach? So a straw man proposal is the 3.7 release, which is coming up, will be LTS. We could announce some deprecations in that release. Of course, we will continue support for the lifetime of LTS, which is approximately 3 years, which conveniently aligns with the EOL of the Ubuntu 14. And going forwards, we can just remove the code. This is a proposal. But what do we think about it? I'm now asking, it's now question time.
Okay, so
Hi, Simon. Thanks for the presentation. First, a comment on line 6, or I mean on slide 6, where you said upgrading would be upgrading to a 5.5-year-old LTS would be ahead of users. It's a little
Yes,
wild
it's a startling statement, but I believe it to be true.
Yeah. Okay. onto the presentation, I think as far as like establishing a minimum, I think part of that goes to what we want to commit to testing upstream as well, like what we want to have for our, you know, as part of our CI system, for instance,
Yes.
that actually evaluates the code and makes it work, and what we're going to, you know, do when it breaks, whether that be fix what we have or just say, okay, now we move forward. So as an example for that, AVX 512, part of our discussion on merging that in was, you know, a commitment by the contributors to run their testing because for AVX 512 because we didn't have the hardware for it in any of our labs, and so we wanted to make sure we could continue to support it. And that testing kind of got shut off some time ago. So yeah, I mean, I guess I would consider maybe part of establishing a minimum is also what we want to be running, right? Like
Exactly.
routinely.
And this is also the case with the distro. So this oldest distro actually was not working until recently. It is working now, but at some point when it goes EOL, it will become very difficult to keep running that. So it makes no sense, as you just explained, to keep supporting it because we can't support it.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, Alice?
So not a question, but maybe a comment. So I'm not sure what's the upgrade path for OVS, but for example, for OVN, we have agreed on because you cannot upgrade past LTS version. So if we deprecate something in an LTS, we can remove it after the next LTS was released, which is more or less aligned with what you were suggesting for the deprecation and the removal, right? So that's what we have agreed on, for example, in OVN.
So I think the idea there was it would continue to exist in the LTS release, but we might remove it from the next non-LTS release. Not the distro, but the support for particularly the old kernel stuff. Yeah, and so support for that would only continue to exist in the LTS stream until the LTS is EOL. So yeah, that's kind of more what we were thinking. But with the distro, probably because of the timelines, we can keep it going longer.
Okay, thanks.
About this wild statement before, do you have any data about
This one?
how many users are using what versions, or it's just what you get to know privately inside Red Hat?
No, so I don't know what the number of users are, but I can. So the OpenShift platform, which is our platform where you would most likely use OVS, there are definitely users using version based on RHEL 8. And RHEL 8, I don't have the exact versions here, but it has older things than this. You can easily go online to verify that, particularly, I think GCC and the kernel. So what exactly the timeline is for Red Hat to move users away from that, I don't know. I can find out. But I would say in the order of years, these people tend to move fairly slowly.
So hi everyone. If people don't upgrade the system, do they actually upgrade OS?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I would say that so this is me speaking as a Red Hat person. We would want the flexibility to upgrade OVS even if they're staying on the older base distro. This is kind of our model.
Okay, thanks.
You gave good examples of features that you want to deprecate in the future. Who will be responsible to map these features and agree that we can remove them?
Red, I forgot to mention this. So yeah, how should we do it? So firstly, we have conversation here. this is like the start of the process to increase awareness of it. But my suggested plan is that we post a patch to the mailing list, and which can be reviewed and also increases awareness. The patch would be a deprecation patch, and that would add some kind of documentation, like to the news file, and it would also be included in the release notes for that forthcoming version. And then we would have at least one full release cycle where it remained. And so this would ideally be the period where awareness grew and people who were concerned about it could raise their concerns, and perhaps we could change plan and not do that. This is the rough idea.
If the, yeah.
Yeah, I think that quite aligns with what we did with the removal of the out-of-tree kernel module. So we first started discussion on the list, then we showed continued discussion on the OVS conference, actually, and then we posted the patch to deprecate it. It went into 2.17 release, and in 3.0 we finally removed it in the end. So it's an established process for deprecating features. It's documented.
Yeah, and in that case, we left the documentation around until the oldest release in which it existed was EOL. So
it's just a side effect of how we maintain our website, because documentation that's published is published for the latest version. So if you want to find something for an old version, yeah, we decided to keep it around for a while. But yeah.
Are there any more questions for Simon?
Thank you very much for your time. Have a nice day.